Hello everybody, Alex, CEO and founder of MarsBased. Welcome to another episode of Life on Mars. And today's episode, we're going to be hosting Amir Salihefendic, CEO and founder of Doist. One company, a remote company. I was going to say a company based in Barcelona. Not entirely true. He's based in Barcelona, but he's been living all over the place. Born in Bosnia, raised in Denmark, lived in Chile, now back to Barcelona. He's been going back and forth between Chile and Barcelona. We're going to be listening to that story in this episode. But the company is pretty famous for being bootstrapped or being entirely remote and great advocates of strong company culture and asynchronous working. In fact, with Amir, we're going to be discussing this and much more. We will discuss the Great Resignation, how to hire for talent nowadays, how to hire and teach and mentor and coach tech talent during the pandemic, and how he as a CEO has gotten in a way that he's taking fewer and fewer meetings over time, and he's very vocal about that on his Twitter. And I see it as something extremely difficult to do as a CEO, because the more your company scales, the more you have to talk to other people who report to you, clients, partners, and whatnot, right? But he seems to be doing a great job about that. And we're going to be discovering the secrets of Amir when it comes to that. Internal meetings, how do people report to him? What are the communication workflows in Doist and Twist, his companies? And much more. How does he manage his calendar? How does he manage the meetings? How does he manage company culture? How does his company deal with the fact that, the hiring junior talent or less experienced people require more coaching, and it's twice as hard to have them absorb company culture, the way your company works, workflows, reporting, policies, and the team bonding and whatnot. It makes it ever so more difficult. We confront our models in MarsBased with theirs. Of course, we have two different companies. Theirs is almost like 10 times bigger than ours, but we're services oriented. They are product oriented. So of course, this is always taken into consideration in the conversation. But I think it's pretty interesting to see how we compare these two models, because these companies are companies that we really admire and we look up to. I have been following Amir personally for many years, listen to every podcast that he does, and he's especially a very accessible person, and he's a great speaker. He's truly building a massive company, and the kind of company culture and values that they've got really permeate into the products that we use at MarsBased. And, if you want to build, if you're an indie hacker, if you want to bootstrap a company, if you want to learn about company culture and remote work, asynchronous work, you do well if you followed him on Twitter, because definitely he's really inspirational, as is his company's blog, because that's one of the blogs I read religiously, and they put really interesting stuff out. This conversation revolves a lot about management, leadership, and values, and scaling a company and reporting and whatnot. It's not very technical. Obviously, as you transition from being a solo founder to then building a team and then scaling to a bigger, I think they've got over 100 employees right now. You cannot be so much involved or hands-on directly in the product. And so eventually you become more of a management person. Although he claims that he's still working a lot, very hands-on in certain details of the product. He's very product-oriented. And for instance, and in comparison or in contrast, I have grown to be more sales-oriented because of the kind of companies that we work on. That being said, now a little bit of an update from the company's side. Today we had a really special day in the company, because we should have met after 2 years of not doing our get-togethers in person. We're not meeting in the flesh. Our last meeting, I talked about this in a podcast a couple of months ago. Our last potential meeting was the Martian Christmas Day 2019, and we should have met today in person in Barcelona for our first company get-together after 2 years. But because of the Omicron variant of COVID, we have postponed it till April, which will make it coincide with our 8th anniversary. And yeah, time flies, because we will be celebrating our 8th anniversary. This crazy adventure started almost 9 years ago. 8 years ago, we incorporated a company. About 8 years ago, We launched our website. We signed our first contract when I was in San Francisco. That's something that I talked in one of the previous episodes when I was discussing the birth of MarsBased when I was interviewed at Indie Hackers Barcelona in an episode that I published a couple of weeks ago. And then about 7 years ago to this day, we signed a contract with a very special client that we still have nowadays. We're working for NICE, which is one of the leading, not the leading publication or media outlet in the Basque Country, northern Spain. We signed them 7 years ago. It was our first retainer client ever. And still nowadays, 7 years after, we still have them. Never decreased the capacity we've got for them. We inherited the project overnight because their previous provider shut down, and we had to hit the ground running, bring a person into the company, which is somebody I used to work with at my previous company at BAS. So we hired David, that has been doing an excellent job with this client, working for so many years for this client. And we even redesigned the website. We implemented, advanced caching. We implemented a newsletter. We implemented a pay-per-click payments functionality, and so many advanced functionalities for this client that, it was a challenge. We actually wrote a couple blog posts on how to upgrade the legacy Ruby on Rails application and how we're still dealing with it, because the code base is probably about 11 to 15 years old. I wouldn't be able to calculate it, but we are upgrading it constantly. We're still working on it. It's a challenging project. It's used by thousands of visitors per day. And so we're really proud to claim that, it's a proof that we have very low rotation of clients. Like, I was always joking about the fact that we hadn't lost any developer in 40 years before Danny quit the company in October last year. But we also have got a very low rotation of clients. So we're very happy when we don't lose any clients over the year. And even when we don't win a new client any year, that doesn't happen because we always get one or two clients, because we always hire one or two people. But if we shouldn't win any clients a certain year, that would be great, because that means that we haven't lost any client and that we haven't been forced or pushed, or we haven't been in need of finding new clients to replace them, right? So we are extremely happy about this. We look forward to working for many, many more years with NICE. And we look forward to meeting our team in person in April. What things can you expect in the next weeks from MarsBased? We are going to be, one big announcement as well is that we are going back to Movistar Center for our in-person events, for our presential events of Startup Grind Barcelona. We have been doing offline events since September. We've done 5 of them. I interviewed my good friend Carlos Cruz, with whom I co-founded Startup Grind in Barcelona almost 8 years ago, and we talked about his own company when he decided to take on quit Startup Grind and lead the chapter of Fuck Up Nights in Barcelona. It was really fun. It was a very emotional and moving day for me because we make a lot of friends at Startup Grind, but it was the first time I interviewed somebody I was a friend with before I got on with Startup Grind. So we're going back to Movistar Center, our regular venue, the one we used to do our events in before the pandemic, where we hosted almost 70 events before the pandemic in that venue, the best venue in town. But ever so thankful to the people of Attico who have been hosting us between September and January. It's been fantastic. It's been phenomenal. Thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts, because they're truly great people to work with, and I'm pretty sure that we'll be doing more stuff with them. As a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, you will be getting an interview with the CEO of Attico Labs, Kino Fernandez, which is one of the persons who helped to bring internet in Spain. So you will get that one on the Spanish feed of the MarsBased podcast in a couple of weeks. And it's a truly phenomenal voyage back in time to the prehistory of internet in Spain. It brings back so many memories of us as a kid. I was born in 87, so it's not like I remember much from the early 90s, but definitely I remember when I first got cable, when there were the dial-up modems and whatnot. So it's a trip back to nostalgia. And I think that's pretty much everything from my side. We are happy to report that we're doing great as a company, that we are receiving lots of love from our community when it comes to the podcast. So thank you very much for all the support. We have almost recorded and published. We have recorded more than that, but we have published right now about 50 episodes in Spanish, 50 episodes in English, which is truly phenomenal. I didn't think the project was going to go this far, but it's thanks to your support. So if you like this podcast and you want to keep it free from sponsors and other annoying stuff like advertising, because that's the way we roll at MarsBased, be sure to hit like and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, you want to give us some reviews and stars on platforms like Spotify or iTunes or Overcast or Google Podcasts, whatever. Everything helps. So we will really appreciate that because this podcast is growing, but we need to take it to the next level. The audio version is performing much better than the video version. So we're going to be spicing some things up. We'll be trying some new kinds of episodes like best ofs and maybe like shorter episodes, company updates. We'll be bringing back finally people from MarsBased speaking in our podcast. We'll be recording some of the technical stuff that we do in the company. We do the Martian tapas. We'll be talking about that in a few weeks. So expect some surprises. I think everybody's going to like them. And also stay tuned. We're bringing back the blog. After 6 months of not writing on the blog, we are recovering it. We're bringing back to life because it's been a little bit dead, and that's detrimental to our company culture and the image of the company. And so after this long process, this long desert that we've gone through, we are going to bring back the weekly, bi-weekly frequency of the blog post of MarsBased. I don't have anything else from my side. I hope that you have a great week ahead and that you enjoyed this podcast. So let's get right into it. Amir, welcome to the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Àlex. It's awesome to be here. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
A lot of people know you because of your remoteness, but where are you exactly based?
Well, I'm based in the beautiful Barcelona, and I've lived here for I think almost 5 years now. Yeah, so we really love the city, and I think it has everything that you want in the city. Yeah,
I seem to remember that you were based for a while. You were based in Chile. And then Chile started getting naughty, and then you had to move to Barcelona, something like that. But you also ran a remote working company, right? So you've been kind of all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I grew up in Denmark, but for the last 10 years, I have basically lived in Taiwan, Chile, Porto, and now Barcelona. Yeah. So hopefully this will be the destination, but we'll see.
Because I don't know if that really coincided, but when things went nasty in Chile, I think that you came to Barcelona, might have been about 2017, and things started to get nasty here as well. So it was good timing, right? Changing one kind of fires in the street for another city with fires in the street.
Yeah. Actually, we had a plan to move back to Chile. So I have lived in Chile, I think, maybe I don't know, 8-9 years ago. That's where I met my wife. And then before COVID, just some months ago, some months before COVID, we wanted to move to Chile. And then we moved there. And then suddenly COVID was super strict. And there was increase in crime and security was just off. So we just, maybe it wasn't really the best decision. So that's why we moved back. Yeah.
Okay. Let's get into this topic. I wanted to discuss how is company culture shaped and changed in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and more specifically, I want to speak about being remote because we've all heard all kinds of things being said about working remotely. We run an officeless company in MarsBased. You guys have also been big proponents and evangelists of remote work and asynchronous work over the years. We truly admire you for that. But it seems like everybody now is doing remote. And I've got a very blunt opinion that everybody is doing remote, but very wrongly. I've been seeing companies and I've been talking to people working in companies and they're like, yeah, we're remote. They're not really remote, right? And how this affects to the attraction and their retention of the tech talent. Because nowadays we live in a very complicated market. I mean, what's the worst thing that you've seen in companies claiming that they do remote since the pandemic started?
Yeah. I mean, just some context, we have worked remotely for over a decade. I think we were some of the first companies that actually embraced this fully and kind of saw the vision, and saw that this was kind of future of work. And of course, like initial, like nobody really believed us. People were just like, you are really crazy that you believe like that this is actually the future, and like that most companies, knowledge companies, can work like this. And then right now we have like millions of companies doing this. But the problem, like you say, like is that they are doing like very, very wrongly. I think like the problem is they are basically taking like the office setup they had and basically porting that into like the remote setting. And this basically, I think, creates like even maybe a more toxic environment than office-based work, because like remotely you can work anytime, and like you have time zones. So that means like people are working all the time. And if you do most work synchronously, then it means like you're connected all the time, you work all the time. It's just like a very, very bad context and like environment. And that's also sad because like initially, like, we have been at this for so long. So we have also had this stage where, we would be in meetings all day long, or like you would be inside chat rooms all day long. You would be connected all the time. And at some point, like you realize like this is a really hell, like you are basically like a really toxic work environment. And that's why, you see like a lot of these companies, including Doist, like you see it with Zapier, you see it like with GitLab, you see it with Doist, with Buffer. It's like you work more and more towards like asynchronous type of work, where you don't actually want to like be connected all the time. We actually want to have like these disconnections, ability to disconnect, like the right to disconnect. Like it should be like everybody's right. Or else, I just think like you have like a toxic work environment, you have toxic life. It's not really the best way to work. Yeah.
And you raised a couple of, you raised so many interesting topics here. Let's try to dissect them. First off, you mentioned that you had the vision that this would become the future of work. Was it really a vision, or did you start working asynchronously and remotely because you actually didn't need an office? Because like that was our case. Like in our case, we didn't see that was the future of work. We really didn't believe in any of that. But we started, it was 2013, and we were, or even 2012 when we started kind of like conceptualizing the company, and one of my partners was living in, or still living in Balaguer, so close to Lleida, and I was traveling all the time, and so we're going to be only three, so Xavi, our CTO, would be the only person going to the office. It didn't really make sense. And then eventually we kind of adopted this as a super ingrained part of the company culture. But in hindsight, we could say now, yeah, we totally saw this. It was the future of work. But in your case, so you actually predicted that this was going to be the future of work, and why?
Yeah, I would say like initially, like we didn't really see the vision. It's just like it made sense because like we grew up on the internet. Like for us, like communicating, and working over the internet just made a lot of sense. And maybe I would say like maybe like 5 years in, like when we hit like maybe 50 people, we could actually see that like there's a lot of like potential here. And especially when you combine like remote work with asynchronous work, that's where the magic happens, and where like I think you get like a lot of freedom that you don't have in like a 9-to-5 like office bound job. So that's really where like kind of things started to click. But initially, like I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, I saw completely the vision. Like no, like initially just like fighting, like trying to survive, trying to build the company, and like not really thinking about like implications of like the structure, the culture that you have. Like that you're creating.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, one of the things that I really wanted to discuss here, because that's a question that we get asked a lot. Like, for the first years, we didn't hire any non-senior person in the company because we were not conceptualized to or engineered to have that kind of mentoring and support for newer hires. So we kind of like wanted people to hit the ground running. We're consultants. So kind of like we knew that in a remote working environment and mostly asynchronous, we're not as asynchronous as you, but we're pretty asynchronous. Let's say it's much more difficult in this kind of remote environments and asynchronous to permeate the company culture and to train the new hires, right? So if you hire somebody senior who's already worked as a developer in a remote working environment, he's been or she's been a freelancer or an entrepreneur, they don't need to learn the soft skills. So we could focus only on teaching the technology. Whereas hiring more junior people, you've got to teach them both, right? And so I think that it's proving to be a challenge, and that's a question I get in every interview. Like, how do you train junior people in remote working environments, in asynchronous environments? And my answer was like, well, we don't hire these kind of people. We started 2 years ago, and it's been really challenging. But we've had to grow the company to a certain size in order to allocate for this mentoring, sort of like a buddy program inside the company, to have like more like one-on-ones and stuff like that. How are you doing? How are you doing with this challenge? That's a pretty long question, right?
And it's also a tough one. And honestly, like, I don't think we are succeeding at this either. And I don't think like many remote and asynchronous companies are succeeding at this. And honestly, like, I think it's a really, really tough, like, and I think we have really like solved this puzzle of how to actually onboard junior people and like train them in a remote setting. And you can also see this like with education, I just don't think it works that well. I think actually maybe like to get onboarded to learn the chops, it actually makes sense to like be present. And the reason is basically like in a remote setting, as a junior, you would be blocked a lot, because you can't really advance with something like, and in like, if you have like synchronous, like present, you can just go in and ping somebody that can unblock you. In a remote setting, I think it's much harder, especially like if you combine it with asynchronously, like, you can easily get blocked and stuck for like a long time. And then you are not really like learning and progressing as much. This said, the beautiful thing is, I think we are tackling this on many different fronts. There's like educational programs for like developers right now where, they're kind of getting onboarded, and we actually have like a connection with other like peers, like that are kind of in the same stage as you, and you kind of have a group that you can work with. But it's super challenging. I think like, as a company, it's much easier to just say, okay, hire like senior people that already like know how to work, and that is much easier. But I think also like it's really a problem because like we lose a lot of talent, and then also we lose the diversity because like, if you look at the tech scene, even like for remote companies, it's mostly like, like white people with like European ancestry that are doing it. So I think, it's a problem.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that we do in the company is kind of like work well is, and I think that you're of the same mindset. We try to eliminate all recurring meetings and have as few meetings as possible, so that whenever somebody gets blocked, hey, you can just interrupt me anytime. But because we don't have meetings by design, by being more asynchronous, we're actually more available to being synchronous, which is kind of paradoxical. And I see the contrast with other companies. Like sometimes, we're working for a client, for instance, that they've got a company culture that I think it's pretty bad, in my opinion. I hope they don't listen to this, but they have public calendars for everybody. Literally, just everybody and anyone can just book a meeting on anyone's calendar at any time. And I think and therefore they've never got time for anybody, because they're always in meetings, right? Whereas we're never in meetings. So if you approach me, can you speak today or tomorrow? Most likely I'm gonna say yes, because I do have slots, because I am asynchronous, right? So it's kind of like weird to kind of like turn the situation inside out. And I know that it's not really easy to understand for people who are not in asynchronous mode, right? But I don't think this transition is easy to accomplish for companies working very, very synchronously in this case. So were you that asynchronous when you started off, or how did that pan out for you guys?
Yeah, we were not like, we also used a lot of meetings. I think actually like it's the most natural thing, because like it's the easiest thing, just like to book a lot of meetings and do stuff like, you have a problem. Okay, let's hop on a meeting to discuss it. Or like, like status updates, just like booking random like meetings to give status updates and stuff like that. So honestly, I think like, I understand like that it's most like natural thing and the easiest part, but the problem is like, yeah, like you say, like, it's really, really like intrusive for like your focus, your well-being, that, people can like just randomly book meetings with you. I mean, that will for me like be a nightmarish like scenario. So yeah, and that's also something I think like in an asynchronous environment. I mean, something as well. I think like you see as you move more towards asynchronous, like writing becomes much more critical, reading becomes much more critical, and also that's another problem. Is like most people are not really great at the written word. Like it's much easier to just like speak and babble than actually write something down that's like super clear and like they can be easily understood and shared. So I think it's also like something that is very challenging, and takes maybe years to master. It's kind of like, becoming a much better writer, much better communicator. And
I think the foundations for these were laid out by the people at Basecamp, because I seem to remember one of their chapters in one of their books was hire good writers, right? Because they say if you can summarize stuff on a blog post or in a Basecamp post or on a email, it's much more succinct and much more effective than a call, right? So, and that's something we've taken that at heart. And I know Basecamp is not all that popular nowadays, but we really appreciate that. We always think like, that meeting should have been an email. That never happens on MarsBased. I've got the feeling that never happens at Doist. But my question for you is from CEO to CEO. As the company scales, and I don't know how many people you are right now?
We are around like 100, yeah.
Okay, so as the company scales, so do your meetings. But I know you've been very vocal about not having meetings. You post screenshots of your calendar and there are like 3 meetings every week, something like that. How do you do that? Because for me, that's the most challenging part. I'm much more sales oriented than you because you're much more like product and team oriented. But how do you accomplish that? It seems that to me that every month, every year of the company, you've got fewer meetings on your calendar.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically like, embracing the asynchronous and like the written, powers that come with it. And like most of my communication is kind of in written form, even like providing, status updates or like some feedback. Like, of course, like I do appreciate like sometimes to the meetings, for instance, like if I need to have like a hard talk with somebody, like I don't think you should do that in text. I think like it's much better to do it in a meeting. So honestly, yeah, like it's just like, I really want to respect my time. I really want to do like the deep work most of the time. I really don't want to do like fluffy meetings where you're kind of in a meeting and you don't really know what you're doing there. And like, these like people babbling, so yeah, I think you can just like, do that by like designing and like really protecting your time. So that's what I have done. And, also like having a culture that kind of goes like 100% into this. That's also really critical.
But also have you probably passed down these, because you probably got to talk to your team and some decisions cannot be taken asynchronously. Like sometimes you need to really like sit down and brainstorm and have like some sort of like lively discussion going on. And so maybe my idea when I was thinking about this, about interviewing you is like, oh, maybe he hired more like a middleman or middle management so that they could take care of these synchronous things and then only report to the CEO, or not really?
Not really. I mean, the whole organization, operates like this. So like most of our leaders and people have very few meetings. So it's basically like very cultural. I mean, something new as well is like inside Twist, which is like our communication platform. Like I think we have probably like posted around 2 million messages right now. So, it's 100 people, 2 million messages. Like that's a lot of communications. Like we are communicating a lot. It's just not like inside meetings.
How do you? Because one of the things that I've been noticing, I've tried to reduce the amount of meetings for the sake of my sanity. I run MarsBased, I run the podcast, I've got Startup Grind, I've got a lot of things going on, and I'm pretty active in the Barcelona startup and tech ecosystems. And I used to take a lot of meetings, kind of like exploratory meetings, helping entrepreneurs, people who want to pick your brain. So these things that are like over the years become very annoying. And but one of the things I started doing is like reducing the time slot for every meeting. And now I do like 15 minutes for people I don't know, and then 30 minutes for everybody, irrespective of whether I know them or not, right? Or maybe for like clients, team. I try to do longer meetings for team and clients, and whoever is not team and clients doesn't get that much of my time because I don't scale, right? So, but one of the things that I seem to notice, I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and then all of them mention over time you start appearing as like elitist or arrogant to other people because you've become famous. I know that's not the case. You really simply don't scale, and you cannot meet 300 people every week, right? How do you avoid that? Because in your case, it's even more extreme, right? Like you're literally taking no meetings.
Yeah. I mean, it should be said, like I do take some meetings. It's just like I'm very, very, protective of when I do that. So for instance, like if I want to help somebody, I will ask them, let's do it in text. Ask the question in text, I respond in text. I don't really need to have like a meeting to do that. And same thing is like, I have like a circle of like friends that are also like founders of companies. Like if I have like a question to them, I just like write an email, with like super short, like text. I don't book like a meeting to ask them a question. Of course, yeah. So, but honestly, I think like there is like a place for meetings. So like for me, I still do like, for instance, like a monthly meeting with like Joe from Buffer, and just like to kind of see him and speak with him, and we just like babble around like stuff and like how things are going, what we are doing, and just like ideas and stuff like that. So I really enjoy those kind of things. And for me, it's not like really eliminating all of that. It's kind of like just like being super opinionated, like when you take a meeting, and like, and being protective as well. And like sometimes also saying no. Yeah. So for instance, just to give you an example, it's like most of like VC requests I get, like I have a template and I just respond no, because like we're not raising money right now. And it's just like, of course, like they want to build connections and stuff like that. But, my time is like very secret. And like, if I want to raise money, I will, book the meetings and go into them. But right now, like, it's just like a distraction. Yeah.
It is. And how do you deal with the team? Because like, for instance, I think that as a CEO, part of our jobs is to spend time with our team, and especially in remote environments where you don't bump into people in the corridors, in the water cooler, or in the canteen, something like that. It's much more complicated to meet with people, right? We meet every 2 months. Now we've been 2 years without meeting because of fucking coronavirus, right? But we're going to meet again. And the thing is, like, every 2 months, that provides an adrenaline boost and a huge motivational boost to everybody. But outside of that, we do one-on-ones, we do a virtual coffee on Fridays, with things like that. But remote environment, that makes it more difficult. Asynchronous makes it more difficult. And in your case, text-driven. It makes it extremely difficult to get to know somebody and to create that bond, right? So how are you dealing with that, and how are you strengthening your relationships with your employees to compensate for that sort of kind of contact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really critical aspect to raise. And honestly, like something that has affected us as well is kind of like this shitty coronavirus situation, because we have not had a chance to kind of meet people. And like, something we started actually to do very early on is like team retreats. I think that we were actually some of the first companies that kind of like went all in on this and like did like these like a lavish like team retreats, and like these are super critical, not because like of the working, but like of connecting people. Like sharing a meal, sharing a beer. I think in a model setting like this is really, really critical, and this is like much more critical, like real, like meeting people and like sharing experiences with them is like where you actually build the bonds. And of course, we still have like these, Zoom calls, like one-on-ones and stuff like that. But honestly, like I think it's not the same. It's not really the same as like really meeting people and like having like a beer with them and like some lunch or whatever you do. So like as a remote company, I think like everybody should do retreats. And if you look at like a lot of like companies that are remote, like they do 2 retreats. For us, like we do 1 company retreat, and then each team has their own like mini retreats, and we try to do them like in like exciting places. We have been to Iceland and Chile and stuff like that. So we don't spend like money on offices, but we still spend like money on like meeting and creating bonds, because I think really that's super, super critical. And that's something you can, like, if you are just asynchronous, like fully, I don't really think you will create these bonds, because like we are still human, we are social, like maybe also like something we also notice, like once you have these retreats, you can kind of like really understand a person much better, because you kind of like, you have seen them, like how they interact, like, their personality, it's much easier to kind of figure out like, how somebody also would communicate then, like in text. Yeah,
that hits close to home when you mention like we don't spend in office, but we spend in everything else, and that's something I used to get a lot at the beginning, right? Like, oh, you guys don't have an office because you cannot afford it when we're like a really small company, or you don't want to pay for an office because you're like kind of like cheap or whatever. It's like, no, actually, paradoxically enough, you end up spending more being remote than being a presential company, because we do the company retreats, we do hackathons to compensate, we do these company days, and then we do this and that, and then buy everybody's like table and desk and computer and external screens and all of that. Like, you end up spending quite a lot, and I think it would be in the same range, if not we're paying more, right? So it's kind of like paradoxical. But the other thing I wanted to ask, so what kind of actions have you done, especially during coronavirus, to compensate for the lack of presential meetings? You're not having your retreats right now, right? So have you implemented some kind of strategies for more like virtual meetings, one-on-one, or kind of like playing games together, like we sometimes do, things like that, to kind of like bond farther?
Yeah, I mean, we do have like hangouts, like random hangouts every month, where you can basically sign up and then you basically meet random people from the company and you can basically like chat about anything. Nice. Those are very fun. And like we did that also before Corona. Like some people also like playing games. But honestly, like I think it's very, very hard to actually replace the retreats. So that's also something that I think like is a huge disadvantage as like a asynchronous or remote first company, is kind of not having the ability to do retreats, because that's really like where we, like really connect. And of course, like you can do stuff on Zoom, but like I really think it's kind of like, it's not really the same, and especially like if you actually felt how it is to kind of like go to like an exciting place and like hang with the people you don't see that often, it's like magic sparks, and it feels very special. While like on a Zoom call, like playing a game, it's fun, but it's not really a replacement for that. So yeah, I will say like we have actually been hurt by this, and maybe even like just I'm actually unsure if that's the only reason, but maybe like also like Basecamp's like explosion that they have is maybe also related to like not being able to meet and have the retreats, because they also did that, and then so maybe I think like it's really hurting like the remote cultures if you can't do the retreat. So I hope the Corona virus situation like is under control soon. Let's see.
I know. I mean, for instance, prior to October last year, we hadn't lost a developer in 4 years. Like, how many tech companies can claim that? And maybe it's related to the fact that we are not doing our bi-monthly get together or the annual company retreat. So that being said, I wanted to get into the next block of the conversation, because yesterday yesterday I had a really good conversation. I thought like, wow, we're going to be covering this tomorrow in the podcast. Like I went to an event and there was the CEO of Northweek and he said something like, because there's coronavirus, but otherwise I would have been going to the office. Like I cannot wait to go back to the office and have everybody back into the office and like, crunching hours there. I was like, wow, you're going to lose so many developers, so much talent in the next weeks if you're applying this. And there was a tweet by somebody like pretty famous in Silicon Valley who said something like, my company announced back to the office next month, and literally 30% of the dev workforce has quit the company with no prior notice, like on the spot. They were like, I'm quitting the company. So I think companies like yours and ours will benefit from this, right? So in nowadays time, is there anything different you're doing to attract talent? Because your personal brand is very strong on Twitter, for instance. But like what other channels, what other strategies are you doing to attract tech talent for your companies?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I think like it's really there has been a huge shift in the market, I think, because like remote was like a super niche. You could like list maybe on like your fingers like how many companies that they were remote first and they had like over 50 employees. They were like very, very little,
There was a GitHub repository for that, like literally, and there were like 100 companies or 70 or something.
Yeah. And right now, like it's basically millions of companies. It's like all around the world, and like everybody's becoming remote. Of course, there's like still some that believe like in the office, but it's kind of like becoming very competitive. And I think like as a remote first company, like something for us and something for me that like I think we'll focus more on is kind of like what is actually our mission, and then attract people by the mission, that you have, and like the values that you have inside a company, like the stuff you're building or whatever you're doing, because I don't think actually like it's really a differentiator to be remote first any longer. It's not really a secret weapon you can use to attract talent, to keep talent. And of course, like people that are forcing people into offices, like they will lose all their talent, like, because that's kind of like, especially I think for like knowledge workers and like developers, designers, and etc., tech workers, I don't think they will see like the future as like 9 to 5 locked in an office and like forced to live in a like super expensive place, or like, so that's how I see it. It's kind of like, I think for like office companies, it will become super, super tough. And for remote companies, it will also become tough because like you're basically like, it's a field with like millions of other companies that are, trying to hire people.
And paying higher salaries essentially, because companies in Silicon Valley, they do remote hiring and all of that. And all of a sudden, developers from all over the world can earn $250,000 every year. So it's like really insane.
Exactly. So yeah. So honestly, I think like, the market, I don't know, it will probably like reach like some kind of like stable state where we'll probably have like global salaries maybe, or something that looks more like that. And then, remote will be fully embraced. That's at least like the future we are planning for. Yeah.
The interesting thing about, the salary thing, I think it's crazy, and I don't have an idea how the future looks like. I'm not a great predictor of stuff. Like I tend to follow people like you and other people who know things just so that I don't have to predict any of the stuff. I'm pretty lazy at that. I'm pretty bad. But with regards to the competition, that's really interesting because literally we were competing or kind of like cooperating to hire talent with 1% or less than 1% of the companies in the world that they were remote only, right? Yeah. We were competing for talent that doesn't really want to go into an office, or they live in a rural environment and don't want to live in a city. And now we're competing against 90% of the companies, right? So the landscape has shifted massively. I know that some of these companies will go back to the presentialism, but they will most likely adopt a hybrid mindset. So we will still be competing with, say, 70% of the companies, 50%, which is insane. And it will make it really difficult for us. And I seem to have noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been following you for years. I've seen you speaking at events and whatnot and listen to your podcasts. And I've seen a slight shift in the kind of content that you create on your social media. And of course, in the beginning of the company was probably more focused around product and maybe like selling because you were focused on like growing the company. And now it's more about like company culture, how you work, working environment, working conditions, team and whatnot. Is it because, I don't know if that's something you planned or just naturally shifted like that, because you want to attract more talent and like keep the kind of team that you have instead of attracting more clients because you don't really need more clients? Or am I completely off the mark here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's not something that I have like done intentionally.
Okay.
I just think like maybe, as like the company grows, my job also becomes very different. So it kind of becomes like, like more macro oriented, more like looking at the culture, looking at the values, and maybe like even attracting people like to the company and like to the mission that we are doing. So maybe like that's like just a natural shift and not really something that I have done intentionally. But honestly, I think like it's super, super critical. And maybe it's also like something. So yeah, like, how do you actually compete in an environment where, you kind of lose your differentiator, it's based like, it's kind of like similar to like products, you had a great product, amazing product. You were kind of like serving a market that was like huge, and there was very limited supply, and right now there's like a ton of supply. There's also a lot of demand, but so it's kind of shifted. And I think like as a company, you really need to like look at what comes next, And of course, for us, like as Doist, like we still have an edge because like asynchronous first, it's like super niche as well. Still
niche, yeah.
And like all the freedom that people get, the environment, like it's also appealing just like to some people, which is great, So it's kind of like a very polarizing culture that you have, which is still an advantage. But honestly, like the way that I see this is like kind of the next shift that will happen is kind of like more asynchronous work. And you can see this like with like Slack CEO, like he had like a Wall Street Journal article on asynchronous work and how, they want to go like more into this and blah, blah, blah. So I think like that's kind of the next shift. And like in the end, like you'll actually not really have, or like we will not have an edge, because you will still have like millions of like asynchronous first companies. So, of course, there's also like, a billion knowledge workers. So, the market is also like huge. So maybe it'll kind of work out in the end. But I think like as a company, it's really like, I think critical to have like something like a mission that can drive people. And then maybe also like figure out like how are you actually going to compete on salaries on a global market? Because the thing I'm seeing is like, for new companies, it's really, really hard to actually get off the ground because the salaries are just like insanely competitive right now. Yeah. So maybe that's also, like where alternative structures come into play. So like, DAOs is a great example, like from Web3 and stuff like that. So maybe that's also like something that we need to look at, like how do we actually structure companies differently? So maybe, you give more equity to people, you incentivize them more like that instead of like having like these, employer-employee contracts that are common right now. So that could also be like the next steps for people is kind of like trying to find like, another structure that can help you compete against like companies that like are super capitalized and can pay like huge salaries and can attract really great people. So maybe like, doing like something very creative could be a way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason I brought this up is because that's something that we are doing intentionally, right? We are I mean, we've never had a problem with hiring, but we know that the market is getting difficult. And right now we do have like lots of clients who want to work with us. So therefore I don't have to spend time in trying to chase clients because they literally just come knocking on our door. We've got a waiting list, right? So now we've got to go after developers. And so we have decided to kind of like change and shift the marketing of the company to be more, I mean, we've got a handbook out, we do the blog, we do the podcast and events, we do a lot of stuff, but much more focused to hiring than to getting clients, which was the initial focus, right? And so it's the new scarcity for companies that are a certain size, perhaps, as developers, not clients. Once you start getting like recurring clients and whatnot, and you go on autopilot on sales, then the difficulty is on hiring. But I think there are two parts of the equation here. One of them is salaries. Yeah, you already covered that. And I think it's super predatory to go and think that, I don't know, you guys probably can, but we can't really compete with salaries there. We pay market, but we pay market in Spain or Southern Europe, but really we cannot pay North American salaries and whatnot. And we think like, we know we can't compete in there. But as long as we know it, it's fine because we can compete with other things. 8 years prior, we could compete on the remote. Now we can only compete on the asynchronous. But there's one thing that definitely makes our company different, and yours as well, is the company culture. Is being able to talk to the CEO, having a great environment, having people who are, most of our people in our company are 5 years into the company. So not a lot of people can claim that. There's the stability. You don't do extra hours and things like that, right? But we need to communicate that because we know it inside, but it's difficult to communicate that externally, right? And so that's why we intentionally are doing that. But I thought that yours was also part of a strategy, but it's even more natural, it seems. But so what other things are you taking into consideration? When are you hiring now? Like, what other perks or benefits? Where are you explaining your potential candidates to try to attract them instead of going to other companies? What else is ingrained in your speech, for instance, to attract talent?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very good, I think, question, and also like something that I think like you need to think about as a leader. Is kind of like, why will people actually come and work at the company? What will actually keep them there? So for us, I mean, I think, we still have like a huge edge given the asynchronous.
Yep.
We also like do very popular products that are used like by millions, that also creates a lot of like interest for people because they know that the work they do actually has an impact. And so yeah, I would say like those are two critical aspects for us, and maybe an edge is kind of like, especially I think like asynchronous first, like it gives so much freedom to people because like, they can structure their days as they like, they can, like right now, like 4-day work week is like a thing, but like if you actually work asynchronous first, you can actually have like 3-day work week. Yeah. Or like you can work, 2 days off. Like it doesn't really matter, you can structure your days as you like. So it's really, I think, like the ultimate freedom for people. So that's why I still think we have an edge. And then the whole thing is kind of like, as well, I have like some friends that have companies that are kind of more synchronous, and they are founders and CEOs. Like they spend like 8 hours plus in meetings per day, and maybe their leadership does as well. So it's just like, it's a toxic environment, and we are kind of like, we have a solution for that. And with that solution,
0 hours per day, right?
Yeah, almost 0 hours per day. But the thing is to note here is like, I still think there's a huge shift in the market. And for us, like luckily, like we have a lot of revenues and like, so we can actually afford to pay and compete on like salaries in most markets in the world. I'm just like afraid, as like the competition will keep like rising, I think we also need to shift a bit. So something you said is kind of like, I think like the problem is like really like, I think local salaries for knowledge workers are kind of gone. And the reason is, let's say that you're really good and you of course like want to attract good people, and you can get like 4x by working at another company, regardless of how good the culture is, if you get like 4x or whatever, like you will go. Like at some point you will go. So I think that's something that's dangerous about the current climate is kind of like we're going more towards like global salaries. Another aspect as well is like, especially in Europe, I think like it's super primitive. Like the stock option structure that we have is I really think like we need to move more into like stock compensation, like maybe even like creating like alternative like company structures like via blockchains or whatever it is, like that can kind of incentivize people differently and compensate people differently. So you're not like just working for a salary, but like you're working on your thing and you have like a percentage of it, and you can see that grow. I think like Silicon Valley, that's kind of the superpower of Silicon Valley. If you also see this like with the current like blockchain companies, they are also really, really great at utilizing this. So maybe that's kind of the future, like how you can actually compete is kind of like, innovating that aspect. This like as for this, like I don't think actually we'll do this because like we don't actually need to take this risk. But maybe if you're starting off, like you don't have much to lose because you will not be able to compete if you're not innovative, and if you don't, like if you do like everybody else, I think you'll basically lose. Like,
Yeah, correct. And actually, one of the things I was like, a lot of people comes to us saying like, oh, I need developers. How can you help me to find a CTO, technical co-founder, developers and whatnot? It's like, I need a plan to hire developers. It's like, first of all, you need a plan to stop losing developers because losing talent is much more expensive than finding new talent, right? So probably the best way to find talent is to stop losing the one you got in the first place, because that means that you probably, if you're losing a lot of talent, probably you don't have a great working environment there, right? So if you reduce your employee attrition, maybe other people will come more often knocking to your door. But we could be talking about this for hours. Time is flying. We got to wrap this up, but I'm pretty sure I will have to invite you again to be a guest on our podcast, because I've got so many questions, and definitely we're on the same page with so many things. And it's exciting to talk about the future with you, Amir. I really respect you for that. But there's one signature question, and everybody gets that on our podcast. It is there any tech fuck up that you want to share with us? Somebody that you've been responsible for and you've done it yourself. We can learn from that, but like a tech fuck up that you've done in your company, in prior companies, and whatever. One really dramatic story. And if it can be expensive, all the better.
I mean, honestly, like I have done a lot of tech fuck ups, because like my background is development, and I'm still actually doing development.
I know.
So I'm still like fucking stuff up. But I think probably like one of the biggest, I mean, honestly, I think I could probably have like a top 10 list, but I would say,
we can do an episode of only your fuck ups if you want. We go through all the 10 of them, but like let's choose one now.
Like let's choose one that I think like is still hurting us today.
Wow.
So basically, I started to do this as a side project, and the problem, and of course, like they say that, I think like Dijkstra said this, like premature optimization is like root of all evil, but sometimes actually, I think it's actually a really, really good idea to think about the future and like the design you make, you should really think like, how can this evolve? And I would actually, I know like some people say, just do like MVP. The problem is like if this MVP grows and you don't have a proper structure, you have not really thought about the future, then you're like in deep shit. And like you need to do major refactoring, major rewriting. So something that I did early on is kind of like we added like sharing to this collaboration. But like today started like as a to-do list for myself. It was like one user mode. The design I picked was like a really, really bad one. Like because I just like, okay, we need sharing. Let me just like hack this together. And then I had like something that worked, and the way that it works is based like when you share to this project, you copy actually all the data between users. And this is still true today. And this works. Like it works, but like it doesn't work when you have like millions of users and billions of like tasks and hundreds of millions of projects. It's like very, very like broken abstraction. So right now, many years in, we are still kind of trying to rewrite from like, copying the data around to just having like one copy of each data, just like you have one project, you don't have like n projects for all the collaborators. And honestly, like I don't know like what the cost of this is, but I'd probably say millions.
I mean, the company is old enough, so yeah, probably it's ranking in the millions. Wow.
And the problem is, like if you have like a bad abstraction, you're really paying a lot for that. Because it's kind of like a fragile, like it's fragile to copy data around and synchronize the copies, because if something breaks in the synchronization, then suddenly you have like a one collaborator that does not see the same data as the others, I mean, it's like completely insane, but that would probably be one of my biggest mistakes. But there are more, like it's.
You gave me an idea. I had first of all, thank you for sharing, because we need to democratize failure, and I think that we all fuck up, and we're very, at least in MarsBased, we're very good at sharing our fuck ups, even though we're a services company, and that really goes against our reputation. But I think that if we all speak about that, you see Sony and Slack and Twitch and Twitter getting hacked and like fucking up all the time. So it's very normal that smaller companies like ours fuck up as well. But you gave me a really good idea. Maybe I was thinking here as you were going through the fuck up, I was like, wow, maybe we should create like a series of episodes of like top 10 fuck ups of every company. And I'm going to be pioneering that. I'm going to be trying it out with a couple people. But if you want to do yours, I'm going to be inviting you again. If you're interested in doing that, we can prepare the, a list of 10 fuck-ups, and we can talk at length about them in another episode. Wow, how do you think about that?
That sounds that sounds great, actually, because a lot of times it's kind of like you're focusing on like, oh, like we did this great thing, but nobody actually talks that much about like, like this was really horrible. Like, I think it's a very interesting concept. It's
a very great idea.
Maybe it has like some potential.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we've all learned a lot, and look forward to having you again.
Àlex, awesome. This was fun. Thank you for having me.